This will be your second video of the pre-recorded lessons for Pastoral Theology. Picking up where we left off in the first video, we went through the 4 stages of ministry as a lifelong process, which includes calling, training, conflict, and convergence. Zeroing in on convergence, it's the moment where your motivations has been purified to seek God's glory alone, where again there is a freedom of just understanding who you are, understanding what you learn, and going about ministry in a way we're not proving ourselves to people. We're not gripped with fear or insecurities that we're gonna make a mistake, but we've achieved a stage where now we have a wholesome perspective of who we are, of what works and what doesn't work, and that allows us to walk in the calling of God in freedom. Motivations have been purified to seek God's glory alone, and now at that moment it's when we really thrive, in that we become very outward focused. The focus at convergence now could be fully on others, not just on myself in the training and the learning process, but actually now on others. And we go beyond a life of regret and looking back, with negativity at the things we did not accomplish. So it's that moment where we're able to move beyond that. Here's what Dr. Lim says about this, and just summarizing the 4 stages. It takes a lifetime of growing in ministry. Never stop learning and deal with your stuff. Shed arrogance. Be a learner. These stages are like a Monopoly game of sorts. The phases are like Monopoly chance cards. If one does not deal with issues properly, go to jail, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Only some make it to convergence. Statistics say that only 1/5 of pastors make it to the stage of convergence. Certainly a stat of concern, in that 1 out of 5 pastors will actually make it to convergence stage. So it tells you that in a way it's difficult, but you have the help of the Holy Spirit to get you there. So again, understanding who you are, where you are, and now when you are, where and when. So pastoral ministry, it's about caring for a group of people at a particular point in time in a particular place. So this is where we get to where you gotta understand the culture that you're in. You gotta understand the city, where it's at, where it's going, because that's going to affect the lifestyle of the people you're trying to reach or you're ministering to. So some of the main concepts in doing pastoral ministry in Canada today. You gotta know that Canada is a globalized country. That globalization is deeply impacting the nation. 40.8% of Vancouver, for example, is foreign born. Those of you living in smaller communities not named Vancouver, you could still see that globalization affects your city or town, especially if you have a university in it or near it, because it brings lots of foreign students. The projection is that by 2036, 28.2% of people in Canada will be foreign born. That is a quarter of the population. I think by 2050, based on census projections, they will increase this number to about 30%. That's a third of the population in Canada will be either foreign born or people born to foreign born parents, if that makes sense. I know that's a little bit of a tongue twister there. So second generation migrants, 2.0 migrants. Places like Ontario and BC, if you go to a place like the GTA, the visible minority, or what we consider visible minority groups, actually are the majority in some neighborhoods or in some cities. That's the case in the GTA, where visible minorities are actually a majority or have become a majority. In Vancouver, and again, let's just say Vancouver and BC, because we acknowledge that some of you do not live in Vancouver. But in BC, our primary visible minorities, and again, this is part of pastoral ministry. You gotta know where you are, and you gotta know what makes the bulk of the population in the place where you are. So you have Chinese, South Asian, Filipino, and Korean as the four top visible minorities, or primarily visible minorities, in Vancouver and BC as of the 2016 census. As of the last census in 2021, these ones remain the same in terms of visible minorities by number of people in BC. And so it's that knowing those cultures, if you're doing pastoral ministry in BC, will be very, very important. Let's talk about urbanization, another one of those sociological phenomena that are deeply impacting Canadians as a whole and Canadians in BC. 80% of Canadians live in metropolitan centers. You have 12 million people concentrated into the cities and metro areas of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. 1/3 of Canadians basically live in or near these three large population centers. You have world cities with 10 million residents. There were only 2 in 1950, but 2014 there's now 29. A big one is secularization, which continues to deeply impact Canada as a country. So secularization just means a phenomenon whereby people either reject or oppose any religious system. So it's not just Christian opposition, but an opposition to the notion of religion, of God, of faith. So Canada is a heavily secular country that majority of the population today have not been exposed to religion or to Christianity. So over the last 20 years, evangelical churches have plateaued. In the PAOC, they always run a statistics. In 2017, it showed that 15% of the churches have plateaued, 9.5% have declined, and 25% of those churches chose not to identify. Nationwide, so the stats I just gave you are concentrated to the BC and Yukon district. As a nationally, or in the nation, 70% of POC churches have plateaued. And part of that is secularization. People, I want to be very careful when I say people are not going to church, because oftentimes we over dramatize that. We can over dramatize the impact of secularization. However, the high index of plateauing churches, not just in PLC but in other denominations, speaks to the fact that society, Canadian society as a whole, are less interested in church. If they come once, it's for curiosity, but then there is no follow-up. And so those are the things. You got to know where you are. You got to know when you are. You know, what's the place, what's impacting populations, what kind of phenomena are happening right now. We live in the age of the technological advancement and social media, where basically it's a digital world. And so, you know, this has implications philosophically and practically. Philosophically, because people are now have more distractions through their access to social media, and that also impacts the way they think. Practically, it's the fact that a digital world means that our strategies to reach out, our strategies to even promote our church and ministry have to rely on the digital age. So we also live in a material and consumerist society. North America as a whole, you know, is very materialistic and consumeristic. You know, a survey by the Barna Group show 81% of North Americans believe God helps those who help themselves. So what does that tell you? That there's an understanding that in order that you gotta go and achieve and obtain things for yourself, in doing that, God will help and add. Politics. So it's a politically divided and tribalized society. And it's become more after COVID. I believe some of these slides come from a time before COVID. You come out of COVID and there is a politically charged world where there is doubts upon government, doubts on media, doubts on people with political authority, and a very emotional and intense reaction to the opposing point of view. Things like nationalism, the influence of American politics into Canada has reached the local church landscape. And so those hostile divisions are things that as pastors now we have to cope with even more. In fact, in a study that I did for a workshop earlier this year, I was talking with about anxiety in ministry. A very recent Barna Group survey showed that now political divisions have made the top 5 list of things that create anxiety in pastors, because it's harder to shepherd people that are being divided on political views. Then we also have decreasing, or I'll say increasing rather, average age in Canada. This is very, very, very pronounced in European nations where birth rates are very low and you're looking at an aging of the population. Japan is struggling big time with that. We see a little bit of that in Canada, where, you know, there is a graying of the population, where the 85 plus is the fastest growing age group. Because, and so this is not just about population as a whole, but also about the fact that when it comes to Christians, most of tithe and church revenue comes from the boomers and the builders generation, the ones that are now post-retirement age into the 70s and some of them into the 80s, where that was a very faithful generation when it came to giving. Not just faithful by giving, but also in quantity. And as they begin to pass on, and there is a less engagement with church, now it creates a little bit of a vacuum as to church finances and where the money necessary in contributions will come for the church to grow and do the projects that it wants to do. So all of these things are just important for you to know. Now, I gave you stats on slides that rely on data from the 2016 census. The challenge in pastoral theology is for the pastor to be up to date with some of these trends. And so, it's always been reading, read, get educated into what's affecting the society that you're reaching at the national level and at the local level, and staying up to date with those things. Another big one, it's the changing of the family unit, or even the idea of family being changed. So here's how the modern family is changing. When you think of family, you're probably thinking the nuclear family. Again, as Christians, we might be isolated from these trends, especially if you've been a long-time Christian, but the idea of the nuclear family is actually diminishing. Only 26% of families are made up of a working dad, a stay-home mother, and children. And this has shifted from 44% only 53 years ago. So we see a diminishing of that. Singles make up almost 30% of the population in Canada. So once again, the idea of the family is changing. When it's talking about singles here, talking about people in adult years, 20s, 30s, 40s, there's more singles. And so that needs to inform the way we do ministry. Single dads are rapidly increasing, up to 34.5% since 2001, and this is a 2016 stat. Obviously, there might be an increase now. Nearly 40% of births were to unmarried women. Teen pregnancies are declining, showing an increased trend of women having children outside of marriage. So these are ways that society is changing. Things that we have assumed have changed. There are more women having children outside of marriage. So it even plays in the way we assume when someone is pregnant in our church. Chances are is that, rather than assuming that, there's a husband in the picture, there could be that there is not. And so how is that gonna impact the way we minister? Same-sex couples, a big one in this part of the world, where there is now not just an increase in the number of same-sex couples, but an increase in the fact that they themselves are adopting kids, or through means like surrogacy, they're having children. And so these are the things, once again, you and I as pastors are not meant to be or become sociologists or anthropologists. However, we must do research and reading on those that are studying these trends, because they help us understand the season in which our city is at. And that's a very, very important concept. In the next video, we will close this part of the where and the when we're ministering, and we'll be looking at a post-Christianity and post-truth culture and what that means for pastoral ministry.